Welcome back to another training video with me, JG1 Barton. In this video, what I want to cover is proper defensive maneuvering. Now, examples of terrible defensive maneuvering or ineffective defensive maneuvering is not in any way limited to any one simulator that I've ever flown. In fact, very good defensive maneuvering is typically the exception. However, there are some pretty basic rules and things to look for that can greatly improve your ability to defend yourself. I want to go over some of the limitations of what I'm about to talk about. What I'm going to discuss in this video is specifically defensive maneuvers pertaining to being in a defensive position. A defensive position is any position in which an enemy fighter is pursuing you from behind your 3 to 9 o'clock line. This is the worst position you can be in because it is the best position your attacker can be in. This isn't an inherently helpless or hopeless position, but there are some things that we have to take into account first. Each aircraft has their own individual strengths and weaknesses. Because increasing lift inherently increases drag, those aircraft that are better at turning are not typically fast, and those who are better at speed are not typically very good turn fighters. Any performance disparity between your aircraft and your opponent's can be used either to your benefit or to your detriment in a fight. Any maneuver that pits your aircraft's strengths against your enemy's aircraft's weaknesses are going to benefit you. Conversely, any maneuver that pits your aircraft's weaknesses against your opponent's strengths are going to hasten your demise. One of the other things that we have to take into consideration is energy states. There are two types of energy that have to be considered. The first is potential energy, and the second is kinetic energy. Any altitude you have is potential energy due to the force of gravity. These energies are interchangeable. You can trade altitude for airspeed by going into a dive, and you can trade airspeed for altitude by going into a climb. There can and usually will be a difference in energy state between you and your attacker. What those energy state differences are and how they stack up to the aircraft performance differences is going to dictate a large part of the options that you have available to you in any situation. The next thing I want to discuss is the purpose of defensive maneuvering. Any defensive maneuvering has to have a purpose. The three purposes of defensive maneuvering are 1. To escape, 2. To reverse, and 3. To drag if you have a wingman or someone who is a friendly in the area that can help you. It would be wise to note that 2 of the 3 purposes of defensive maneuvering are actually offensive in nature. To maneuver with the purpose of reversing means that you are intending to put yourself in an offensive position on your opponent. Dragging your opponent is also offensive in that you are trying to lead them into a position where they can be attacked. Defensive maneuvering with the purpose of escape is simply trying to convince your opponent to stop pursuing. This can be done in a number of ways, and we'll go over them shortly, but before we do, I want to go over one golden rule that should never be broken. When in a defensive position, defensive maneuvers will always trade altitude for airspeed. This is because speed is life, and any hard maneuvering you are going to do is going to cost you airspeed. So in order to keep your airspeed up, you're going to have to trade some altitude to maintain it. But the second part here is the real golden rule, and the one that I see broken most often. Any maneuver that trades airspeed for altitude is an offensive-minded maneuver. All too often, I'll see an opponent try for a reversal without trading their airspeed for altitude, or they'll inadvertently put their nose up when they're pulling evasive maneuvers. Lowering your airspeed while an opponent lines you up for a shot is only going to make you an easier kill. Next, we'll put all of this together and analyze a perfect example of what not to do in a defensive situation taken from one of my more recent videos, Trollhawk. In this video, I'm chasing a Focke-Wulf 190 in a P-40 Warhawk. He dove to the deck in an attempt to escape, but doesn't know that I followed him down and was able to chase him. I'll go over how I did that in another video. The 190 pulls up to regain his altitude in a false sense of security, not knowing that I'm there. He hasn't made any fatal errors just yet. I still have to close within distance to make the kill shot, but I'm not quite going to get there. So I throw some lead over the top of him to see if I can spook him. Maybe force him to run again. Or possibly force him into an error. I don't know if the Focke-Wulf never saw me, or if he saw me and just misjudged my energy state, but here he missed a perfect opportunity to simply roll into a split S and dive for the deck and make another escape. But instead of keeping his nose down and running, he pulls back up into a flat level turn and allows me to get a shot off. This is completely unnecessary. And after he misses his second opportunity here to simply dive away and make an escape, I realize that his defensive maneuvers don't have a purpose. He's not going to run away from me and escape by turning back into me. and he's certainly not going to force a reversal from this distance with this little energy disparity, especially considering the fact that I'm flying the maneuverable fighter here. In this long ascending barrel roll maneuver, all he's done is kill his airspeed and allow me to cut his corner, so I'm just reeling him in even faster for the kill shot. This has allowed me to go from taking pot shots to saddled up in a true offensive position. Now I've reeled this Focke-Wulf 190 in so far, there's a real possibility that he can force an overshoot, and it seems to happen here when he puts his nose up. However, he doesn't follow through, and instead of coming back into the vertical and trying to force the overshoot and follow through with it, he goes downhill and drops his flaps. The Focke-Wulf 190 is now just throwing away precious airspeed and altitude, and he's going to end up in a turn fight, which is pitting his aircraft's weaknesses against my aircraft's strengths, and that is a strategy that is never going to end well. At this point, he's dumped so much of his airspeed that he's just a sitting duck. In this shot, I get in some good critical hits and manage to avoid spinning it in myself. This Focke-Wulf pilot missed out on multiple opportunities to escape and even an opportunity to reverse, because his defensive maneuvering did not have a purpose, and he ended up in exactly the worst position you could possibly be in. In this next clip, I'm in a Focke-Wulf 190 down low. I think I'm over the front, but I'm actually deep in enemy airspace, and I don't know it. I saw that smoking plane, it turned out to be a friendly, and where there's smoke, there's fire. So I'm looking for an enemy fighter, and as I do, I start to gain altitude, and well, wouldn't you know it, well, there he is, chasing me. Instantly I identify the fact that I'm flying the faster aircraft and I have more energy than he does, and I'm also out of guns range. So simply increasing my throttle, putting my nose down and regaining my speed and extending away from him is all I need to do to keep from being shot down. I could have, if I were aggressive, pulled up into a high yo-yo and tried to attack him, but I had no idea if I had the energy to pull off that maneuver or if he had the energy to follow me, or where exactly I am and who's above me. One of the things that you have to remember when you go offensive is that you automatically make yourself a target, and a very easy one, for anyone who might have more altitude than you. I have seen and been the victim of, personally, far too many times, having altitude over an enemy fighter, thinking that I had him in the bag, only to be swept out of the sky by another enemy who had more altitude than me. And it turns out that I was so far back in enemy territory, it was actually near their airbase, and that's why I was taking a little bit of flak. Eventually the fighter chasing me loses interest and breaks off, allowing me to continue extending completely outside of the combat area before I start to go back on the hunt and gain altitude. In the next clip we'll go over what a successful reversal looks like, but before we do that I want to go over some points. The hardest conditions to pull a reversal is when you are flying an energy fighter and you are under attack from a maneuverable fighter that has more energy than you do. It isn't impossible to do, but it does require that your opponent make some mistakes. But we can help our enemy into these mistakes by using a few tactics. The first tactic is priming your attacker, and this is going to be used when you've spotted your attacker when he's still outside of guns range. If you've spotted an attacker rolling in on you, coming downhill with a boatload of steam, and he's near your dead six and has a very low angle shot, one thing you might want to do is prime your attacker by setting up a slight break into them and give them a better shot. That may seem asinine, but this is going to do two things. It's going to make you a better target so that they'll be more likely to take the shot, and it's going to increase the amount of deflection that they have to use. Typically, an attacker will roll in using a lag pursuit, which means that their nose is just slightly behind your aircraft as they try and close in and get a better position. But they can't shoot at you from that kind of a pursuit. In order to take the shot, they have to transition to a lead pursuit, and their nose has to cross from behind your aircraft to in front of your aircraft, and they won't be shooting at this time. When their nose transitions from behind your aircraft to in front of your aircraft, that is when you are going to brake hard in the other direction and take the shot away from them. This tactic allows you to cross your enemy's gun sight without ever being shot at, and bullets that aren't flying can't hit you. In the next clip, I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about and show you what it looks like from the attacker's perspective. Here, a yak is rolling in on me with energy from a low angle. I spot him and brake slightly into him, priming him for a shot. Then, right as he transitions to take lead, I break away from him and go in the opposite direction. And again, I prime him for a shot. And again, just before he's able to transition into the shot, I take it away from him. Let's look at that again from another perspective. Here the bandit is dropping into my 6 at a fairly low angle, and when I spot him, I break slightly into him to set him up for the shot. And as he gets closer and I anticipate him transitioning towards the shot, I roll in the other direction and go underneath his guns and take that shot away, and do again the exact same thing going the opposite direction. But what exactly is going on here, and why is this a good idea? Well, the reason why this is effective is it minimalizes our loss of energy. If you break hard into your opponent, you're going to lose a lot of energy. In order to get that airspeed back, you're going to have to trade off more altitude, and if you're at low level, that might not be an option. And by enticing your opponent with a shot, you also make them more likely to become fixated. This makes them more likely to chase the shot instead of preserving their position behind you, and that makes them less likely to counter your reversal. And because this allows you to preserve more of your energy, you will have more fighting energy when you go to perform your reversal. I'll show you this fight again from the beginning of the attack, but this time I'll show you how this plays into our reversal. Here he comes again, low angle attack. I set him up for a shot. Just before I anticipate that he's going to take it, I take it away from him and set him up with another shot. As he chases this shot, I'm going to take that one away from him and force the overshoot. Now as he goes up into the vertical to try and preserve his position, I have enough energy that I'm going to pursue him. And this is where the fixation of our opponent is going to come into play, because now he's primed to chase the shot, and instead of continuing vertical over the top of me to preserve his position, he's turned back into me and inadvertently crossed my gun sight. And this time I get a shot and pull off his elevator. Although this fight isn't over, I have managed to flip the script entirely and gone from a completely defensive position against an opponent that had a more maneuverable aircraft with more energy down low to being offensive on him. As effective as this tactic is, it's not going to get you out of every situation. Sometimes you're going to have to go with the scissors, and this is the Focke-Wulf 190's bread and butter. The scissors is more effective when your opponent is attacking you from greater angles. Instead of trying to set them up for a shot in order to get a free clear across their nose to go in the opposite direction, we're going to go around their gun sight entirely and deny them a shot in the first place. I'll show you an example of this next, but again, here, the objective is to preserve as much energy as you can, because we are trying to go offensive. We need to have as much energy at our disposal as we can when we do try to force the overshoot and secure the reversal. We are going to be crossing our opponent's nose. However, we want to do so aggressively and as quick as we can, but also going around the gun sight, going over or under their gun sight, never through it. Again, we want to use the vertical when forcing the overshoot. That way we can dump our airspeed by preserving it as potential energy and altitude. In the next clip, I find myself under attack when my opponent is very close with a high angle shot, and I immediately go into the scissors. I only notice the bandit as he's about to take the shot, so I immediately break down and away. And as I do, I see that he's out of position, so I break back into him, again down and away. Now that he's really out of position, I go into the vertical to try and force the overshoot. As he goes vertical, I notice that instead of continuing vertical and then coming back down into my 6, he tries to turn back into me hard. As he has maintained his position on my 6, I need to force another overshoot. But first I have to get him back out of position. And here I do that again by initiating a scissors. Here I've dropped my flaps to scroll off even more airspeed to help further the overshoot. In his extremely aggressive flying, my opponent stalls, overshoots, and gives me the shot that I've been fighting for this whole time. Unfortunately, I miss. But I've managed to force a neutral situation from a purely defensive one, and I can raise my flaps, put my nose down, and get the hell out of dodge. Another good tactic to use is jinking, and this is going to be used when your opponent is at close range but has a very low angle. As your opponent chases the shot, you're going to end up crossing their nose multiple times, but you need to do this as quickly and unpredictably as possible. Again, preserve as much energy as you can. If you're trying to force an overshoot, you want to scrub off as much as you need to, but no more. If you're trying to extend to escape, then you certainly don't want to scrub off any energy that you don't have to. In the next clip, I'm running home on the deck in a BF-109 with a damaged radiator after attacking an enemy airbase. An I-16 drops in from altitude and attacks me from my dead 6, and I don't catch him until he's very close. I just managed to catch a glimpse of the I-16 behind me, and immediately turn right to give myself a better view. The first two things I'm trying to find is what he is and how much energy he has, and I realize it's an I-16, and he's got more energy than I do, and this isn't a good situation. I switch back and forth, roll, and even go -G in an attempt to make sure that he can't get in line on me. I also chop my throttle to help force the overshoot, because I know he's going to stay full throttle, knowing that my aircraft is inherently faster than his. He's going to want to preserve as much energy as he can to keep on the attack. But instead of going vertical and maintaining his position above me by preserving his energy, he turns completely around, and I give chase. He sees that I'm pursuing him and turns into me, giving me a high angle shot, which I missed completely. And after blowing through the merge, I simply put my nose down and continue. Now, let's take a look at that from his perspective. Here we can see exactly how much altitude this I-16 rolled in with, and it's no surprise that he was catching me. At this point, I'm still completely unaware that he's even around. Just as in priming my attacker, this guy is coming in from a very low angle. However, I don't notice him until he's too close for me to use that tactic, and the energy disparity isn't quite large enough. He is going to catch me, but he's doing so too slowly, so I want to use that slow rate of closure to my advantage and force him to stay on the throttle as long as possible. Here's where I'm going to begin jinking, crossing his nose as fast and as unpredictably as I possibly can, and even in this case, braking towards his gun sight only to brake back away from it in a -G maneuver. After forcing the overshoot, the I-16 seems to just want to call it a day and turn around and head back the other direction on the deck, but I'm not going to let him go so easy, so I turn around and give chase. If I didn't have a damaged radiator, we'd really have our fight on our hands here, but considering that, I'm only going for one attack. The I-16 pulls almost a perfect defensive maneuver here by pulling back into me just as he should to minimize the amount of time I have to shoot. However, he didn't pull any evasive maneuvers through the merge, and the only reason why he got out of that unscathed is because my aim sucked. At any rate, I've now got way more energy than my opponent, and I can simply make my escape. While we've only just scratched the surface in this video, I hope you learned a lot. If you did, please share this video and subscribe. If you have any suggestions for what the next video should be, please leave them in the comment section below. I'd like to send a salute to my opponents in the fights in this video, and I'd like to thank you for watching.